Greetings to you all joining us today. My name is Murado, and I'm a member of the Neighbours, Friends, and Families, in short, NFF Youth Council. It is with great pleasure and happiness that I welcome you all to our second youth conference. Today, we have many speakers who will spark conversation and dialogue with us all. We acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and the Chinoochtoch nations, on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. With this, we respect the long-standing relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land, as they are the original caretakers. We acknowledge historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit endure in Canada, and we accept the responsibility as a public institution to contribute towards revealing and correcting miseducation, as well as renewing respectful relationships with Indigenous communities through our teaching, research, and community service. NFF Youth was started over a year ago. We are made up of young people who are socially engaged, critical thinkers, and are catalysts of positive change. We, the youth, hold crucial perspectives that are important to inform many educational policies and curriculum developments. We are a body of youth that aims to support the Youth Education Project housed under the Neighbours, Friends, and Family program. We hold community conversations by means of healthy talks, engagements, and conferences, just like this one today. You can find more about us on our website, which is now posted in the chat. Today's conference holds the theme Healthy Masculinities, a discussion about healthy relationships. We here at NFF Youth thought this was a vital and engaging conversation to have. I am joined by my fellow youth members, Ella and Daniel. If you would like to know more about our members, check our chat box for more links. Also, please be sure to stay in touch with NFF and CRIVAC on our socials, which are located within the chat box as well. The goal of today is to hold engaging conversations which will educate us a bit further on healthy masculinities and healthy relationships. Our lineup today is as follows. We will start with our keynote speaker, Tyler Simmonds, moderated by myself. We will go over healthy masculinity, mental health, and use of mindfulness. Following that, we will have a panel hosted by our youth member, Ella. She will moderate the panel featuring Monica Boquin, Mike Sywink, and Matthew Sereda. Our final speakers are Amy Keating and Fraser Brown. We will hold a conversation about how deconstructing expectations of masculinity is key to creating a future without violence, along with our YAC moderator, Daniel. If anyone experiences some discomfort and needs someone to talk to, reach out to the numbers on the screen, and there are other resources within the chat box. Okay, so I know many of you are now excited for today's packed conference, and I would like to thank all of you for taking the time to join this conversation. At any time throughout this conference, you are welcome to leave a question in the Q&A box, and we may answer one of it with our guest speakers. We will now begin with our opening keynote speaker, Tyler Simmonds. Tyler is an award-winning Canadian film director with titles including In My Mind and Lead with a Love series. Tyler is also a keynote speaker and advocate for mental health and is named one of the 10 inspirational people under 30 you should be following on Twitter by the Huffington Post, along with Malala Yousafzai, Stephen Curry, and Shawn Mendes. Throughout his life, Tyler discovered that much of what is learned about being a man can be harmful to ourselves and to those around us, although intentions may be good. Now I welcome Tyler, our keynote speaker, and invite him to introduce himself.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. Really looking forward to this. I feel that it's really a much needed conversation. And yeah, I'll start off just telling you a bit about myself. I am from Nova Scotia, North Preston. It's a small community back in the woods in Dartmouth, and it's actually the largest Black community in Canada. We, growing up, I was always surrounded by a very caring and loving family. Everybody in my community, it feels like we were like all related. We all knew each other in some way. So I always felt safe there. And there were a lot of things that I learned there growing up. All of my different beliefs and morals that I grew to believe, that grew to shape me as a young teen. It all came from that small community. And yeah, I was taught so many different things growing up. But a lot of the things that I was taught, they didn't really have to do with my emotions. They didn't have to do with my mental health. It wasn't really something that we talked about. And so growing up, I was living with a lot of sadness and a lot of anxiety, and I didn't know what it was as a teenager. I was just really confused. I remember speaking to my parents and even saying to them, like, why am I like this? Nobody else is this way. I feel like I'm an alien from a different planet or something, because everybody else seems to be fine. And I remember I couldn't even have a conversation with one person one-on-one. I would be afraid to go to family gatherings because of my social anxiety. I was really depressed, and at that age, I didn't have the knowledge to put a name to these feelings. And I remember growing up, it was often the same thing. A lot that I would hear would be things like, "Oh, you need to just go to church," or "You need to just be grateful for what you have." And I remember thinking that I don't think it's that simple. And it was tough. It was really tough in my teens. And I remember in high school, in my last year of high school, that was when I remember waking up one day and thinking, I can't deal with this anymore. I have to figure out what's going on. And so I went to the school library and I typed in Google, why am I always sad? And why am I afraid to be around people? And all of these different articles started coming up about depression and anxiety. So I printed off these different articles and I took them home to my parents. And I remember my mom saying, I don't know what these are. I don't understand this, but we believe you and we're going to take you to get help. And so that's when my journey of becoming more mentally healthy started. It was really hard for me to get the help that I needed, because I feel like even at that time in society, it just in general, it wasn't something that we talked about much. Mental health wasn't really talked about. So it was just really tough for me to open up. And little by little, I remember I would start sharing things about myself to my therapist, and I started writing a lot. I would write poetry, and that would be a part of my self-care. I would meditate, and that was so helpful for me. In doing these things, I started to become more confident in myself, and I started to accept myself. Then I got into filmmaking, and I realized that I could use my experiences to help people, and to also help people see themselves in art. And so I took that and I ran with it, because expressing myself, it just felt right. It felt like it was helping me, but also helping other people. And that's really the main thing that I do in life. It's expressing myself. It's being vulnerable. It's letting people know it's okay to be your authentic self, and you don't have to apologize for it, which can be a really hard thing to do at first. It was definitely hard for me. But you start to realize that it's not this thing that we really need to be so afraid of. When my social anxiety was so bad and at its worst, I remember I actually told my mom that I wanted to be a public speaker, and I even said this to my doctor, and my doctor was like, Tyler, do you think that you want to like ease into this a bit? Like, you have social anxiety, so are you sure you want to speak in front of a group of people? And my way of thinking, after doing a lot of work and reading a lot of books on overcoming my fears and self-help, I was thinking, you know what, I want to do something that I'm really afraid to do. And so what I did was I reached out to this organization in my hometown, and I told them that I was a public speaker, and I was not a public speaker at this time. And it was a talk on mental health. And this was my very first time ever speaking in front of a group of people about my mental health. And I stood up there in front of all of these people. On the inside, I was terrified. I feel like I had a pretty good poker face, but I was terrified. And I don't even remember that talk because I was so anxious when I was doing it. And the thing that I do remember is the people that came up to me afterwards, who were all from my hometown, who knew me growing up, and which made it so much harder. So many people came to me and they thanked me, and they said things like, I really wanted someone to finally talk about these things because I live with this, or my son lives with this, or my cousin, my aunts and uncles. And just nobody would talk about it. So that's when I realized, oh, this is the power of being vulnerable. This is the power of being yourself and expressing it. So I just kept going without stopping. And that's what I do now. I use my filmmaking, my writing, my speaking to people to show people that they're not alone, that we all have stuff. The one big lesson that I learned is that none of us are broken. It's nothing that we have to fix about ourselves. There are things that we can grow on. We can grow in different aspects of our lives, but we're not broken. And once I learned that about myself, things changed a lot. I started to see myself from a different perspective. Oh, if I'm not this innately broken person, I can grow. I can fix the flaws that are bugging me. And so that's what I did. And a big message of mine is to keep working on yourself. This goes to the people that are struggling with mental health issues and the people who aren't. I believe that we all have aspects of our lives that we need to help grow. We need to become better at different aspects of our lives. And it's not this, oh, be disciplined and just be hard on yourself and force yourself to fix parts of yourself. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is accepting, okay, there are parts of myself that I wish were a bit better. And that's okay, because literally everybody else in this world has that. And beating ourselves up about these things and being hard on ourselves, it really just slows down that process. So self-acceptance is a huge part of my journey. And I always tell people, it's not the reason why I make these films or that I speak at different places or even the Twitter thing. Like, it's not because there's something special about me. I don't feel that way. I just feel that I just am okay with showing people who I really am. And when you're able to do that, there's a confidence and a peace that comes with that. That's really like no other. And I really believe that. I know that we want to speak on healthy masculinities, and I know that there are some questions for me around that, so I would love to get into that. I don't want to go on too long about my story.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Tyler. I think you're saying we all have stuff that we need to grow on is very important and will be the kind of the topic we're going to discuss today. Okay, so I welcome you all to put questions in the Q&A box whenever throughout this conversation for Tyler, and it will most likely be answered live. And before we get to those questions, Tyler, I have a few questions I would love to ask you that I've personally prepared. Okay, so starting off, Tyler, why do you think our world as a whole and we, like as people, need more mindfulness?
Yeah, I believe, especially after the pandemic and the lockdown, and even seeing everything that went on, it was, for myself, looking at the world and society, I was definitely like, wow, we are very anxious as a society. And it was pretty scary because, yeah, how scary the pandemic was and the virus, but also there were so many people alone. And so much stuff was coming up, and I remember seeing so many people talking about these terrible experiences that they were having, and people were lashing out on different people and expressing their anger, and it was really, especially for someone that's really sensitive, it was really hard for me to see. Um, and it really changed the way that I even interact with certain people. I believe that a lot of us are dealing with a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear in general. And I think taking those moments to step back, those moments to, instead of acting off of impulse, sitting back and thinking, okay, what's the best thing for my health, for my mental health right now? Sometimes that's all that it takes. For myself, I've realized that whenever something comes up that is triggering, that makes me feel like, oh, I really want to react to this right now. My first reaction now is to think, okay, I really want to do this, but I'm going to sit with myself for a second and think about it. And it's helped me a lot. It's helped me stay out of a lot of trouble. And I think it can help all of us stay out of a lot of trouble, and also help our mental health, because yeah, we want peace. That's what's ideal. Yeah.
Of course. And I think especially the pandemic changed the concept of mindfulness because we were all trapped in, we were forced to be in our mind. So we had to do some thinking, about everything.
Yeah.
So I see we're getting some questions in the Q&A box. I'm gonna just continue on with a few more questions and I'll move on to the Q&A. So you have been deeply involved in the discussion of masculinity, Tyler. Why do you think it is so important to address this topic head on?
I think well, definitely for me, it's really important for me to talk about it, because I've acknowledged the ways that the things that society taught me about being a man. I just masculinity in general. I know the things that my dad taught me growing up, that my older brothers taught me, and a lot of those things I think back now and I'm like, that was really unhealthy, which led to a lot of things. It led to a lot of ruined relationships, a lot of mental health struggles that could have really been coped with a lot better. Like certain things that a lot of men are told growing up. It's like, oh, boys don't cry. Just suck it up. You're not a girl. I remember even growing up in my community when I would hurt myself, or my brothers would hurt themselves outdoors playing, and the adults would just look at us and like, oh, just get up. And if one of my cousins who's a girl would do the same thing, they would rush over and they'd be like, oh, are you okay? What can I do to help? And oh, come inside. And that, I really believe that makes a lot of women very prepared when getting into like relationships, very emotionally healthy usually. And then it's men coming into relationships, and often women are like, come on, why are you so cold? Why aren't you listening? And I've dealt with this. All of my male friends dealt with this. We're like, oh, we haven't been really taught how to be that way. I wish I could be, but I don't know how to do it. And that's really why I think it's so important, because the majority of men that I speak to, they're like, oh, I'm often told by my wife or my girlfriend, or even just my female friends, like, just open up more, tell me how you're feeling and be vulnerable. But it's so hard because it doesn't feel safe a lot of the times. And it's also something that we weren't taught to do growing up. We were taught to be tough. Play fighting was, I remember me as a kid, I was play fighting all the time. And yeah, and we know that the things that we do as kids frequently, it can translate into our adult lives. It's how life works. Yeah, so I would say that's a really big reason for sure.
Yeah, that's really important, I think, talking about how growing up it's different. And when we, of course, I'm not big, like I'm not grown up yet, but seeing many say, oh, you haven't been taught this, oh, it really says, but let's go back and see, where did that come from?
Mm.
So someone asked, are toxic masculinity and toxic femininity expressions of the same thing? So I think they're talking about some sort of feeling.
Mm. Okay, yeah, interesting. I like that question. So I actually, yeah, so toxic, the word toxic,
Yeah.
I often tell people that, and I used to name my talks, oh, toxic masculinity, and
Yeah.
I stopped doing that because I don't like the idea of putting toxic on a gender or person in general. Um, I have friends that say it about people sometimes. They're like, oh, that person's so toxic. um, in my mind, I'm always like, so the entire person is toxic, or just this thing that they did is toxic, or this belief that they have is a bit toxic. And speaking for myself, I know the feeling of feeling like, oh, somebody thinks this thing of me, so why would I even listen to them? Which is what I believe in the past few years, a lot of men have been feeling like. It's this defense thing. It's like, oh, people are calling me toxic, so I'm just going to push them away and be what they're saying that I am, type of thing, which is harmful, and we don't want that. So healthy masculinity is what I like to name a talk, or healthy femininity. I can't speak towards that as much because I don't have that experience. But I believe that all genders have we all have things about ourselves that we can improve on. And a thing when it comes to women, it's very usually very in touch with their emotions and very capable of vulnerability. Not always the case, but it's the majority of the time it seems that way. In men, it's like the opposite. But a big thing that I encourage people to do is to look within instead of always pointing our fingers at others, because that's the way that I believe we can heal as people. Um, we do need to hold people accountable. We do need people to realize what they've done wrong and change these things about themselves. But we also need to make sure we make space for that. We need to make a safe space for men. We need to make a safe space for women. We need to make space for the LGBTQ plus community. We need to make safe space for everybody. And yeah, I think that's in my heart, that's the answer to a lot of the conflict that happens between men and women, or different genders in general. It's a lot of back and forth. It's almost feels like we're on the playground again, and just going back and forth, fighting, and sometimes I'm like, okay, guys, stop. We love each other. Just listen to each other's sides. We don't have to fight about it. If we disagree, we disagree. And I really believe that the world can be a better place if we view things in that way.
Yeah, totally. So I saw that question, I saw the word toxic, and I'm seeing that word a lot, especially lately around this conversation. And I think showing that we should change that maybe into preaching on saying we should change that into healthy masculinity and encouraging that instead of pointing the fingers and saying, oh, that's toxic, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question I prepared for you. So often you state that although intentions mean well, what we learn about what it means to be a man can be harmful to ourselves and to others. So could you explain kind of how that is?
For sure. It's growing up, I was taught, and definitely about 99% of the men that I know were taught that men are supposed to protect, provide, and we're supposed to be the ones that work really hard. We don't show when we're sad. We don't show weakness. And I grew up thinking that. I was thinking this way as a kid. And I believe a lot of males were growing up thinking in this way. And it's not a very it's not always the healthiest way to be. We need to remember that there's a reason why we have emotions. Suppressing them can lead to a lot of things. It can lead to a lot of aggression. If we don't know how to deal with our sadness, that sadness will be suppressed, and it can come out impulsively as anger. It can turn into violence, and that's something that I really feel that it's not an intentional thing that any of us men are doing. We were living out what we were taught, and I think letting people know that that's not something that people are intentionally doing is really important, because instead of making that person feel shame, like, oh, I'm ashamed of myself because I'm this way and I made myself this way, it's letting them think, oh no, society has taught me this, and this is something that I need to work on. This is something that I learned about myself in my early 20s. In my early 30s now. In my early 20s, I learned that there were certain things about myself that, even in relationships, I remember hearing from certain women saying things like, oh, you're so cold. You don't even communicate with me. You're never vulnerable with me. And for a long time, my response was, oh, that's just me. In my head, it was sort of like, oh, I guess they just have to deal with it. But when you get to a certain point, when I got to a certain point, I realized, okay, how can I be the best me? How can I make people happy around me? How can I be that person that is vulnerable, even though it scares me so much? How can I open up to people, even though I'm so afraid to do this. And I just started to read books by a lot of men that learned this already before me. And one in particular was James Baldwin. And I remember reading his stuff and thinking, wow, this person is just so able to be themselves. And I realized that was the thing that vulnerability and openness did for me. It let me be who I truly am. And yeah, that without feeling that shame and realizing that being able to feel emotions and express ourselves from a genuine place, it's really healing, and it can change a lot about who we are as people. Because me, I was this closed off person, like nobody could get in. And now, being the person that I am with my current partner and my current friends that I have, it's like, oh, I have this love, I want to give it to you because that's the right thing to do. That's yes, that's what makes life beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, so totally. So that was really one question I really wanted to ask, and thinking in this perspective, and like our intentions may mean well, but truly it's vulnerability that's the expression. And when you say that, it's really important. I think a lot of people connected to that. So one other question, someone asked, this may seem a little controversial, but someone said, does the world need more masculinity or femininity?
Interesting. I wasn't asked that ever before. But what do I think of that? I think the world just needs us to be ourselves. Like there's femininity, there's masculinity, and I see it as, speaking from like a mindful place in doing all of this work with practicing the Tao and Buddhism and stuff like that. And life has a yin yang. There's always these two sides to everything, literally everything. And we have to embrace both. We have to embrace the femininity equally as much as we have to embrace the masculinity, I feel. And I feel that that question can be controversial because people believe that masculinity can be this very aggressive and harmful thing. And I'm a believer that I believe that it can be healthy. We don't need to see masculinity as this thing that makes us want power and control over people all the time. We can look at the good sides to it. And when you really look into it, it's like within masculinity, there are things that we need to work on, a lot of things that we need to work on. But within femininity, there are things that need to be worked on, a lot of things. And if we can just look at it in that way, I think things can be a lot less chaotic between genders. Yeah.
Totally. So that question kind of made me think. It's like they're separating the concepts of masculinity and femininity. And like when you said the yin yang, that's the perfect balance, or that's I think that's the perfect ratio or whatever. So one other question I would like to ask. I'm sure you have been through a lot of experiences that have changed your perspective on this topic. So like you mentioned earlier in high school and your past experiences, those are really interesting, by the way. So, what was the one experience or one thing that has made you so passionate about mindfulness and healthy masculinity?
So
It's hard to
I'll
do this one. Yeah.
I'll talk about the mindfulness part first. So with mindfulness, that really helped me with my anxiety. And I was just extremely anxious. I was overthinking every single aspect of my life, and it was exhausting. And I learned about meditation, and it took me a while, but I started to learn how to meditate, which looking back, it was pretty simple to do, but to get to that point to where you realize how simple it is pretty hard to do. And once I started meditating, I remember thinking, oh, wow, this is like a cheat code to life. It's like I can meditate and suddenly everything doesn't seem so big in my head. Suddenly things don't seem as stressful. It just is like learning in the Tao Te Ching is a book that I would read all the time. And I learned with that book, it's like, don't fight against the universe. Just flow with it. And life can be a lot easier. It's like if you're in a boat and you're in this storm, if you keep trying to go and go, and you're like fighting against the waves, chances are you're going to fall over and you're going to have to get back in, and it's going to be so tough. But try just thinking, okay, what happens if I just let this wave push me for a while? And when I need to, I can turn, but let me let this wave push me. I'm not going to fight this wave because I can't control water. um, and that's what I learned from mindfulness. Um, with with masculinity, I realized that I was shutting a lot of people out, and I was being really cold, which is what a lot of people were telling me was the toxic masculinity. And I did a lot of reading on it and a lot of talking to my therapist about it. And I kept coming back to, that doesn't make you toxic. That means you're afraid. And as soon as I saw that I was afraid, it helped me see other men in a similar way. I was like, oh, that guy who keeps acting out because this person wants him to open up and share things, that person's afraid to do that. And what do we do for people in general who are afraid? Do we shame them? Do we call them toxic? Do we get mad at them and tell them that they're terrible? No, we say, I get it. I get that you're afraid. Maybe, maybe right now's not the time. Maybe we can't talk right now. Maybe you need to talk to somebody else about this. And it just changed my perspective on things. Yeah, I in my early 20s, I remember vividly being this person who was very, very much so an advocate for women's rights. And honestly, I was the type of person that thought, oh man, we kind of suck. Like that's how I felt. And I didn't realize the impact that was having on me, and how that was affecting the way that I even saw myself and my friends. It wasn't coming from a place of compassion. And now I believe that what's healthiest is caring about all. We don't need to pick a side. We can really just say, I'm here for you, but I'm also here for you. And I think we genuinely, the majority of us, we genuinely care about people. And I think nowadays with social media and all of the what people would call toxic stuff that happens on social media nowadays, it can make people be divided. It can make us want to pick a side, and I get that. I totally understand that. But I really want to be the type of person that is like, okay, I understand your perspective, and I also understand your perspective. So let's see how we can work together.
Totally. So yeah, so follow-up question, do you think meditation really is the cheat code to life?
What was that?
Meditation. Do you really think it's helpful? Because
Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah.
yeah, that it's
And
a lot of people say that.
but I say that not for everybody. So I
Yeah.
definitely have met people that, like, even like now I'm in a relationship, and I've tried to meditate with her plenty of time. She's like,
Yeah.
what am I doing? Like, I have to be doing something. And it
Hmm.
can be different for different people. Some people don't want to just sit there in silence, and I get that. I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm a bit weirder than other people. I can just sit in silence for hours sometimes. But there's like walking meditation. There's even going for runs. I feel that that's a form of meditation, like when I'm running and only focusing on my breath, because yeah, that's really what meditation is. You're just letting go and just focusing on the breath. Yeah.
Well said. Okay. So the next question, someone asked this. It's kind of a general question, but it does have some meaning, and we've been speaking about this. So he says, what does masculinity mean to you?
Huh.
Mm,
It's hard to really define, because there's the scientific definition of male, and it's really, to be honest, it's not something that I would. The question was, what does it mean to me, right? Not.
yeah. So I think we've been speaking about what it means in general and
Mhm.
how we can apply it, but yeah, so it's a general question mostly.
So to me, definitely, it's changed a lot. I shared a lot about how I was taught masculinity was supposed to be, and now I see it as this thing where I have, with a lot of the studying about the scientific definitions, and then also reading about the emotional connection to masculinity, it's really hard to define. But for me personally, and I think that people can choose what it means to them individually, but for me, it means being someone who is caring and compassionate, and also those things that were included in the toxic part, the protection and the providing part. I really do see these things as masculine, but I also see now compassion as that, being able to sit and listen to somebody, because strength isn't yelling. Strength isn't just reacting out of emotion. Strength is being able to think, okay, I'm feeling something right now. Let me respond in a healthy way, in a way that's healthy for me, in a way that's healthy for the other person, in a way that makes everyone feel comfortable. And yeah, and growing up, I was always taught, like, yeah, men were supposed to be strong. And it's funny because growing up, a lot of us, we believe that, oh, we got to show that we're tough, like with fighting, and it was like yelling or arguing. But is that really showing strength? I don't believe it is. I believe showing that compassion and that vulnerability is true strength.
Totally. Okay, so the next question I want to ask you, so vulnerability, compassion, and empathy are two things you have said are important for healthy self-expression. So what are some ways youth can express themselves in ways that break gender norms? And on top of that, how can we start?
Hmm. I think what I encourage people to do is just, if you feel if you feel something and you feel that that needs to be expressed, or if you feel that's being suppressed and it's almost like this itch to express it, finding like a creative way to express that is so powerful. Even a creative way of using your voice. There's so much creativity that we all have in us. Like, I believe all of us have so much creativity in us. And I also believe that creativity can be so healing. Just, I remember like sitting in my room and painting when I was really depressed, and as a young person being isolated from everyone really because I was so anxious and so depressed, in painting something that I really felt and then seeing it afterwards and thinking, wow, that's actually pretty good, and how that would make me feel. um, it's also, it's therapeutic going through the process, but seeing the finished result a lot of the time, it's like, oh, I actually did that. And also when you share these things with the world, it brings an extra confidence to it, because you're like, oh, this is coming from such a personal space that I protect, and that I am often afraid to show to people. But I have it in me to say, you know what, I'm just going to show it to you, even if I'm afraid that it's probably not good. It doesn't matter that much. I'm just going to do it because what I've learned is, on the other side of fear is, it's something beautiful often. For me in my life, 100% of the time, the things that I was extremely afraid to do and I did, I left feeling like a better person, more confident. And I encourage people, if you really want to do something but you're afraid, just think about it and think, okay, what are the pros and cons? And is it really that bad if like someone laughs or something? Because I've been there. People have laughed at me, and people have felt certain ways about me. But when you really accept yourself, you can get through all of that stuff, and you can laugh with them a lot of the time.
Totally. And when you say what's on the other side of fear, like I'm gonna take that with me. I think if you don't take that risk, you'll never find out. And truly, what's the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a follow-up question from someone. So they said you mentioned James Baldwin, whose work focuses a lot on race relations. Could you speak a bit on the intersectionality, which is a concept we spoke about at our last conference, of Black male mental health?
Yeah, for sure. I'm actually working on a documentary right now about that, and I learned a lot from James Baldwin, and a lot of his writings are so applicable to today's times. It's it's a common thing that a lot of Black men are seen a certain way, as more aggressive, as a bit scary and stuff. And as a Black man, I can say that a lot of the times we're not even thinking about these things. We're not even thinking, oh, this is how the world views me, until something happens and we're like, oh wait, did this happen because I'm Black? Did this happen because I'm a Black man? And it can be really, really hurtful. I've had quite a bit of experiences with people treating me differently because of being a Black man, and just feeling like I've been treated unfairly. And I talk to people a lot about how it feels living with depression, and then you can stop looking at the depression and the mental illness for a second, then you look at, oh, okay, the ethnicity. Oh, I'm also a Black person. I'm also a man. I'm also from a community that's portrayed as a violent community in the media. So how it's like really thinking about that. How would Black men feel going out into the world? And a lot of it is subconscious. We're not consciously thinking about these things, but we're putting up these walls because we're feeling like we have to have extra protection around us. And especially with the history that we know of, it's valid that a lot of us would feel that way. And I think that that can also even make it that much harder for men who look like me to open up and to feel comfortable and safe. So that's also a really big reason as to why I feel that I should talk a lot and read a lot and watch a lot of documentaries about masculinity, because there's so much that there's so many of these invisible shields that we're putting up in front of us to block others out. And I just want to help try and take those shields down so we can really be ourselves. Yeah.
Of course. So I think that was a really important idea. So the next question. So we see too often young men who are depressed and suicidal because of issues surrounding toxic masculinity. There it is, the word toxic again. So Tyler, how can we as a world encourage young men to express vulnerability?
Um, I think I think compassion and empathy is the answer, 100%. Um, honestly, I myself, I had to take a step back from social media because a lot of the things that I still read now, when it comes to men, which and I don't even speak up about it. And I'm speaking to you all now, but on social media, I wouldn't even talk about a lot of these things because I know that I'm going to get a bunch of messages saying, oh, do you hate women or something like that? When really what I'm trying to say is that we all need space to feel. The documentary that I'm working on is called Permission to Feel. And it's really about giving people permission to feel, which is something that I feel like a lot of men need right now. Like, just feel, you can feel whatever it is that you feel right now, and it's safe. I'm not going to laugh at you. I'm not going to call you weak. I'm not going to use it against you in the future. And I think in this society that we live in now, with the social media, all of that, it's very popular to laugh at a man who is having a breakdown, or laugh at a man who's coming off as weak. But we wouldn't do that to, well, we shouldn't do that to anyone else, and we shouldn't do that to men, because that's real, in my opinion, that's really going to just, that's going to cause what people call toxic masculinity.
Yeah, so that question is really important. And I think that documentary tying back to vulnerability, I'll definitely check that out, and I'm sure a lot of us will. So this dialogue was really important. Thank you so much for joining me in this very important dialogue regarding healthy masculinity and what we can do to promote vulnerability, empathy, and compassion to ensure positive self-expression. So thank you all to all participated in the Q&A. We will now take a 5-minute break where my fellow youth member Ella will be moderating a panel with Monica Boquin, Mike Sywink, and Matthew Sereda. So Tyler, just a final question. Can you leave us all with one final idea, so a summary that people can walk off with during this break?
Thank you so much for this conversation. What can I leave you all with? Just, yeah, love one another and love yourself.
I love that. I love that idea.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Tyler. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'd just like to start by saying thank you to Tyler for joining us at the Youth Conference today and for sharing your journey. And I wanted just to thank you for speaking so candidly with us about the importance of being compassionate and vulnerable, while also having the courage to stand up and speak out about the challenges associated with gender norms. Your words and your story have been both inspiring and eye-opening for us aspiring youth activists. So the next portion of our evening is the panel discussion. Today, we're going to be having an open conversation about traditional gender norms and how these norms affect relationships. We will also discuss the importance of emotional awareness, self-expression, and its role in healthy relationships. So we have 3 panelists joining us today. Our first panelist is Matthew Sereda. Matthew is the Equity and Inclusive Education Learning Coordinator for the Thames Valley District School Board. Matthew is not only a board member with the Canadian Courage Project, but also a committee member on the City of London's Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Oppression Community Advisory Committee. His work towards truth and reconciliation is award-winning. Our second panelist is Monica Boquin. Monica is a Community Engagement Manager at White Ribbon, the world's largest movement of men and boys working together to end violence against women and girls. Monica organizes projects that advocate for gender-based violence, prevention, and healthy masculinity initiatives. Finally, we have Mike Sywink. Mike is originally from the Whitefish River First Nation and currently works with the Center for School Mental Health at Western. and also supports Indigenous students throughout the Thames Valley District School Board. Mike organizes programs that support healthy relationships and Indigenous inclusivity. Monica, Mike, and Matthew, on behalf of the Neighbours, Friends and Family Youth Advisory Council, I'd like to say welcome to the Youth Conference. So I have a couple of questions for you guys. First, I'd like to start with Mike. Mike, where do you think gender norms originate from?
I don't know. I saw the question just first off. Hi, everybody. I'm Mike. It's nice to meet you all. That first original speaker was absolutely fantastic. I listened to the whole thing. It was great. Thanks for having us. Thanks for having me. So I was going over the questions yesterday, and I was trying to think, like, I can only speak from my own experience and kind of where they originated from. So I kind of like, I think about my own upbringing and stuff. So I think it was kind of like a combination of everything, right? I was heavy into sports when I was growing up, and there's definitely that those gender norms there in terms of like, you got to be the big tough athlete kind of guy. So just through different things, like through sports, through friends, through movies, through older siblings, not my own. I'm the oldest in my family, but I definitely had friends who had older brothers and stuff. So I remember a lot of lessons, I guess you could say, from things that they've learned, and kind of talk to us about different things as we were the younger crew. So I kind of think it was a combination of everything. This not just the sports that we would play, but like athletes and the professional athletes that you look up to, and movies and different things and music. And so it's kind of, as a person, as a young adult male, like, you're kind of getting bombarded with these different things from everywhere you look. And one of the like, guys, I'm a little bit older, but back then, like, we didn't have the smartphones, and you didn't have that constant connection that the smartphones and stuff, everything you have today. So there was somewhat of a break, and there's somewhat of a difference there. And the whole social media thing wasn't a thing, but I think a lot of those gender norms just kind of got implemented through all different avenues, everywhere you went. I feel, anyways.
I completely agree. I think it's different for everybody, but I really connected with what you said about sports. I think even I experienced that growing up, that there are sports for girls like dance and gymnastics and more feminine sports, and then the guys are the ones that do football and soccer. So I completely agree with that. Monica, where do you think gender norms originate from?
Yeah, I think I had a similar experience as Mike in thinking where they came from, because it's so normal. Like, that's how society works. And since a young age, we know how we're supposed to behave. And pretty much the whole world works that way. I think for me, in my experience, I always like to think of gender norms as related to power. So I think they were created in a way to give powers to certain individuals, and also for them to control the rest of us, basically. And that's why I think I connect a little bit with Tyler's conversation and also Mike's answer. We give these attributes to men, power and toughness, and the rest of us have to be submissive, and we understand that we know they're in charge of the world, and we're here to follow them. So I guess for me, it's that way, because I've always felt it as well, growing up as a woman, knowing that this is my place, like, I'm supposed to serve a man. That was my father growing up. So I guess it's that way, and since a young age, we learn it.
I agree. And I hope that by having conversations like the ones that we're having today, we're able to take some of that power and redistribute it more evenly. Matthew, where do you think gender norms originate from?
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to sort of give a shout out to Monica and Mike for their answers. I couldn't agree more with sort of this idea that gender norms are sort of this sort of very subtle, insidious type of power dynamic, like Monica's describing, that I think impacts all of us, regardless of our identity, in sort of in ways that, unless we really intentionally try to pay attention to it, it's really hard to be aware of. And so in the same way, when we confront racism, we need to sort of start by acknowledging that racism exists, and that we live in a world that's sort of built on notions of white supremacy. In the same way, when it comes to men's violence against women and girls or hegemonic masculinity, we need to recognize that these are the very foundations of the power dynamics that exists in the world that we all live in. And so I when I was thinking about this question, I really approached it also from a story. So I work obviously in education and focus on a lot of these conversations with children and youth. But I'm also a dad of 4. So I've got 2 daughters and 2 sons. And so I can't really separate out how I approach this conversation from my professional lens and my personal lens as well. And so if it's okay, I just want to tell a quick story that I think sort of captures this. So my one son, he's 8 now, he was 5 at the time. He was playing recreational soccer in sort of a gym space. And in the gym is sort of like in an arena. So there's sort of like a metal cage that sticks out from the wall outside of the black line. That sort of encloses a fire extinguisher. And I don't know if any of you have sort of watched 5-year-olds play soccer lately, but there's zero strategy, right? It's just like a flock of seagulls chasing the ball around the gym. So that's what was happening. And my son had the ball. And so nothing else existed for him in that moment other than the fact that he wanted to kick that ball into the net. And I think you can sort of see where this story is going. So he's running along, eyes only glued on that ball, and he runs his face straight into this metal cage, right? And just all the parents are just like, I run up to him, and he's like, okay, Dad, I'm okay. Guess what? I'm like, I don't know what, buddy. Like, you just ran your face into a cage. Like, are you okay? And he's like, I didn't cry. And I couldn't believe it. His dad's the equity learning coordinator for a school board. This is the work that I do every single day. I try to be really inclusive with my language, how I'm parenting. And at 5 years old, he had already learned that not only he shouldn't cry, but that if he didn't cry, he should also be proud of that fact. And it was a really painful moment for me as a dad to sort of think about, okay, like, I need to step up my game. How is this happening already that at age 5, he's sort of inherited all of these really problematic views? So yeah, I appreciate the question.
Thank you, Matthew. I have a second question for you guys. What sorts of risks and consequences do gender norms pose in relationships? Monica, can we start with you?
Yeah, well, I think there are many. And I think most of them we normalize as well, and we no longer speak up or talk about them as real issues. And I think something I liked about Tyler's presentation was he talked about how mental health and masculinity are tied together, and how men, for example, are raised to not show emotion. You should bottle it, like your son Matthew shouldn't cry, but it would be okay if I cried in his case, for example. So I guess that also comes out in different ways. Like Tyler was saying, sometimes it comes out as violence. And that's something I do a lot with my work, basically, is talking about violence and what leads to violence. And it's in essence that it's the way we engage men, or we put them in this box, and we give them this expectations, these attributes, like they should be this way, but we also do the same to women. And then people have to either choose to be men or women and follow everything in that box. And not everything is healthy, because like I said, for example, I was thought to be, yes, emotional, but also very submissive and a caregiver. And I'm expected to get married and have children. And that has to be my dream, my priority. While men were probably raised in a different view. So I guess that's also the power dynamic we were talking about, like how men would always have the power in a relationship, and everybody else would always follow them, and they go first, we go second. So I guess in a way, there's always someone who is at a disadvantage than the other person. And I guess that also shows a lot of violence, but also hurt someone individually as well.
Thank you, Monica. Matthew, where do you think, what sorts of risks and consequences do gender norms pose in relationships, in your opinion?
Yeah, and similar to Monica, I really appreciated sort of the keynote presentation focusing on that connection between men's mental health and concepts of masculinity that are inherited. I think like we would be remiss in this conversation if we didn't sort of acknowledge that sort of the end consequence is men's violence against women and girls. We know that we saw a dramatic increase in femicides that occurred under COVID-19, sort of this idea of the shadow pandemic. And, you know, even just 2 days ago was sort of the National Day in recognition of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And so like we need to bring and keep bringing that into the conversation. Like absolutely, we need to be supporting men's mental health, and that needs to be a part of this conversation. But we also can't lose sight of sort of that end goal, that ultimate goal of ending men's violence against women and girls. But I think in the way that Monica describes it is so apt, though, that, you know, the only way we can really get to that final conclusion of making sure that men aren't harming women and girls is to make sure that men are well in and of themselves. And I think that that's what the COVID-19 pandemic really showed to us, is that, you know, when we had these added burdens of financial instability or mental health challenges, men experiencing loss in their personal lives, nowhere to turn, I think it's not a surprise to any of us on the call that sort of the way men enact those emotional challenges is oftentimes tragically through violence towards women and girls. And so I do think that we need to deconstruct these gender norms, and we do need to help men find more gentle, caring ways of being men and boys. Not only is that good for us as men and boys, but ultimately it's good for the women and girls that are in our lives as well.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm really glad that you brought up the topic of violence against women and children, especially during the pandemic, because I think that there's been so many effects of the pandemic in all of our lives. And we talk a lot about hospital shortages and at-home learning, but I think part of the conversation that gets left behind is how it's actually affecting domestic violence for people at home. Mike, what are your thoughts?
I was listening. Can you say the question? Just say the question again.
Yeah, my apologies. So what sorts of risks and consequences do gender norms pose in relationships?
Risks and consequences. Okay, that's the part that I forgot. So I kind of like was struggling with this one a bit because again, like I'm just going from my own experiences and stuff. Within my own house and my own relationship, we don't really have like those gender norms in our household. And I'm super proud of that. So like a lot of those like stereotypical roles and those stereotypical tasks around the house, there's none of that. You know what I mean? Like I do my share of cooking as well. I do the dishes all the time, and all these different things that were like, you know, those stereotypical roles for women. We don't have anything like that in our house, and I really have to like thank my parents for that, because when I was growing up, when I was a lot younger, we didn't have those either. You know, my dad would help out with the laundry, and my mom would be outside like splitting wood, you know, with an axe and all these different things. So we didn't really have those gender norms in our house, and I think that is why they work so well. My girlfriend and I, we've been together for like 7 years, I think, and it's been absolutely fantastic. And because of that equality and that respect that we have for each other, I kind of like in these types of things, I think I kind of, because I'm Nishnabek, so I kind of think about like our some of our teachings and some of our gifts that we're given. One of those teachings are the 7 grandfather teachings. So you think about like things like love and respect and truth and honesty, and humility especially is a big one. So when you carry those things in your everyday way of life and also within your relationships, they help and they make things a lot better. Especially if the person that you're in that relationship with is doing the same thing. And like I said, I can only speak from my own experience, but that's kind of how our household works and why it works so well. I totally trust her, she trusts me, and we have all this freedom, and we kind of just do what we want, and we do a ton of stuff together. And those risks and consequences that kind of could potentially happen if we implemented those gender norms and stuff. I don't know. I just can't see it. You know what I mean? I just can't see that in my own house. So I don't know.
Well, I think that sounds very healthy. Gives you the opportunity to express yourself healthily and true to yourself. So I think that's great. And that's something that we can all strive to implement in our own relationships in our lives. So I have a third question for you guys. And my third question is what we can do to raise awareness and start conversations about healthy self-identities and challenging those gender norms that we were talking about. So Matthew, I was going to start with you.
Sure, yeah, and maybe if I could tie this back to what Tyler was talking about earlier in terms of really starting the work by looking inward before we sort of point fingers or cast stones at others. I think that is the place that we all need to begin in this work, and really doing that deep self-reflection in terms of, how have I inherited some of these gender norm expectations, but also how am I committed to pushing back against them, right? Like it's one thing to be aware of a problem, it's another thing to actively work to resolve a problem. And so I think, that's also the place that we need to get to. But I agree with Tyler, the way we need to do that is by committing to role modeling, healthier versions of masculinity and deconstructing gender norms. I think about my work as a professional, and I'm very proud of that work. But the greatest impact I will ever have in my own community is the work that I do on myself, and the behaviors that I role model for my own children, right? And so how am I committing to calling in my male friends and my male colleagues, those people that I have close relationships with? I think that's always the place that we are going to have the greatest impact in our world. And so thinking about those ripple effects. But then we also can't sort of forget about the systems that are at play. And I think Hockey Canada is really shining a huge light on all of this right now. And so we see, all of these big organizations that are taking their funding away from Hockey Canada, and I understand that there's some real problems in that organization right now. But it would also be great to see these organizations turn around and donate those funds to something like a Nova or a White Ribbon, or these organizations that are doing the work to dismantle some of these underlying issues that are impacting all of these conversations. And so I would really agree with Tyler in that way, is that the work has to begin by looking inward, but we also have to commit to that idea of radical accountability and sort of making sure that we're a part of the solution.
I also really liked what you mentioned about being a role model to like your kids and to those younger than us, because I feel like we're setting a precedence for the generation below us. And so if we're starting to have these conversations and are demonstrating, healthy relationships and trying to get rid of gender norms, and they're going to look up and follow us in that. And that's one of the best ways that we can kind of deconstruct these unhealthy mindsets. Mike, what do you think?
Man, it's always tough to follow Matt because he's so good at this stuff. But I'm good buddies with Matt. I've known him for a long time, so we've done a lot of things together, and he's fantastic at what he does. What was the question?
What we can do to raise awareness and start conversations about healthy self-identities and challenging gender norms. It's a bit of a long one.
Awesome, thank you. So I kind of think about like my own personal work, and even though like a lot of my work is not done kind of in this particular area, a lot of my work is done supporting Indigenous communities and our Indigenous students. So I kind of think like a good framework for this is kind of what I'm trying to do in my work with supporting Indigenous youth. So a word that's been thrown around lately is reconciliation, right? You hear reconciliation, but now it's time to turn these words into actual action and do things so we can see real actual change. I think the time for talk is over. It's time to actually act on these things that actually do something. I think the first part would be education, right? Learning about like gender norms and all these different things, and just kind of actually getting an understanding of what it is. And I think like participating in different things like this, like doing like these different conferences and really submersing yourself in trying to learn more about it. I think kind of what Matt said, like looking internally too, if you really want to be a part of that solution, right? If you want to be a part of that, it starts with you. And then that education piece, and then turning those words into action. I'm ready for change. The more that you go online and the social media and all these different things, the world can be a pretty ugly place. And for a lot of different people and a lot of different groups and a lot of different for everybody, right? I'm ready for a change. I'm ready to see things start trending in a better direction. And I think that equity and that equality and that understanding of each other and walking side by side with your brother and with your sister. I think this world needs reconciliation. And yeah.
I really like the concept of reconciliation, that it's one thing for us to sit around and talk about all these things that we can do to make the world a better place, but we're never actually going to see change unless we actually do the things that we're talking about. So Monica, what do you think we can do to raise awareness and start conversations about healthy self-identities and challenging gender norms?
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo Matthew's and Mike's answers, basically. I think the same. If you want to start a change, the first person that has to change is yourself. I like hearing that Matthew and Mike from their families, like they are challenging gender norms, for example, and it can be as easy as that, just doing it with yourself, doing it with your family. I think if we become more open to other people, if we want to create an action as well, that's enough. Because sometimes we think just one person, there's no way we can do anything. But I like to think we can make a huge change. Like sometimes we have conversations with students and we talk about how simple it can be for you to fight gender violence if you maybe stop saying the usual jokes you hear, if you maybe stop following the same behaviors you do, and those little actions create a change. It's also the same thing as they were saying. It's all about education. If you don't want to learn, if you don't want to change, nothing will be done. And like Mike said, we live in a society that basically follows social media and we're always on our phones. So you can easily start education in social media. You can easily start sharing with your friends some of those educational posts. If you have any questions, like go and look for answers, attend this type of events. They might be a bit intimidating. It's true, but it's always great for you to learn, for you to change. And that for me is everything. If you're willing to do the work, like Mike said, things will change.
Thank you, Monica. I completely agree. Sometimes we can think that by being careful about the jokes that we make and the things that we post on social media, that it's not really making a difference. But if everybody's doing that, then already we're making a big impact on the world around us. So I have a fourth question. What does authentic self-expression look like to you? Mike?
Like just being myself? Is that what you mean?
Authentic self-expression, yes.
I love me. Okay, like, and I mean that like humbly, of course. Like I don't have this gigantic ego, but I'm super proud of the work that I do, and the way that I'm trying to make this world a better place, right? And that's where I get my kind of like my confidence from, I guess you could say. My true authentic self is who I am. I'm very outspoken. I am very I say what's on my mind. I dress how I want to dress. I'm here presenting at a conference, and I'm wearing my Raptor hat. I got my Jordans on. Like that's just who I am. I'm trying not to fit in this box, this colonial box of I work at a university, so I have to dress a certain way or do a certain thing. I want to be myself, right? And if I want to wear a Raptor hat one day, I'm going to wear a Raptor hat. And like it's not just about like my physical appearance, but it's about like not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. So when I say I'm supporting these kids, I'm not just doing it from 9 to 5, right? I'm out there, I'm having these conversations, I'm having these difficult conversations with like, let's say I'm playing basketball, and or I'm playing poker with my buddies, and we're sitting around the poker table, and you know they all have kids, so they have questions about it was just September 30th, National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Say they have questions about that. I'm having those conversations with them so they can have those conversations in their home with their kids, right? So I just think my true authentic self, and how do I express that? It's not just about talking the talk, it's walking the walk. So making sure that you stand by your word, and like guys, like everybody, we should all be trying to make this world a better place. Everything that we do should not be for us. This work that you're doing, I know a lot of you guys are a lot younger and you guys are in high school, but like somebody like me, this work that I do and this life that I live, it's not for me. Okay, I'm doing it for my nieces. I'm doing it for the next generation that's coming through. I'm doing it for the Indigenous students that are currently in school. And I'm doing it for the ones that aren't even born yet. I'm trying to make this world a better place for them. And I think that's my true authentic self and how I express that. Did that answer it? Is that, yeah?
I think it did. Absolutely. I just wanted to say thank you for being such an amazing role model, and just for being somebody who's so authentic, and like you said, that you love yourself, because that's something that other people can look up to and know that it's okay to live like that, you know, and to find happiness in that. And also, I love your Raptors hat.
Thanks. I went the whole black theme today.
I know, I really like it.
There's definitely thought put into it, guys. Yeah, I like to match, but
5 out of 5. Monica, what does authentic self-expression look like to you?
Yeah, I really liked Mike's answer. I love myself. That's very powerful. And I think Tyler said something similar. Not being afraid to show others who you are. And I can understand it's a very scary concept, especially because we live in a society where we're afraid of judgments, or other people are actually judging us as well. And we're expected to be a certain way and behave a certain way. But I think to be completely free and happy, it's being who you really are, not being afraid to show who you really are as well. But it's also for other people to accept who you are, not judge you, not trying to put you in those boxes, in those labels, controlling who you are. It's also respecting and allowing people to be happy and free. And like Mike said as well, it's doing what you feel you want to do. You want to help people, keep helping people. You want to speak up as well. You don't have to be quiet. You don't have to not do things because you're young. I think it's very powerful when you just do things that you're feeling you want to be. That for me is self-identity.
Thank you, Monica. I completely agree. I think as long as we're worried about the judgment of others and what others think about us, we're never really going to be able to be our authentic self and really achieve being happy with who you are. Matthew, what does authentic self-expression look like to you?
Yeah, and I got to give kudos to Mike too, because he always comes with these like nuggets of wisdom every time I meet him. And so this idea of like loving oneself, sort of being aware of what those sort of gender expectations are, but still choosing to love oneself and love one's way of being. I think that that's incredibly powerful. So I am going to take that away with me tonight, and probably, Mike, I'm going to loop it into my presentations too. I'll always give you credit though. And so I couldn't agree more. And actually, when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking a lot about the youth that we're intending to serve with these types of presentations. And I think that like they're really onto something powerful. So again, when we think about being one's authentic self, but also deconstructing gender norms, I think about the femboys that are in our schools, or, you know, non-binary genderqueer students. How are we ensuring that there's a place for them in these conversations about masculinity, right? Like, how are we pushing back against those traditional stereotypes of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a boy, and recognizing that sort of the first harm that we cause to young boys is by trying to force them to fit a mold that might not be who they authentically are. And I think that that only causes feelings of blame and shame and resentment, and all of these just really, really negative emotions that lead to, you know, thoughts of depression and suicide and drug abuse that we know is far more common in young men than any other population. And so I wish we could get to that place where everybody just loves themselves for who they are, and isn't so concerned about needing to fit the mold of what sort of society tells them to be. So yeah, thank you for that, Mike. I thought that was beautiful.
Thank you, Matthew. So that was all the questions I had prepared, but I noticed a question in the Q&A from somebody from the audience, if you guys don't mind answering another question for us. So this person asked, how do you think in a multi-generational home we can start to have conversations and break these norms? So Monica, what are your thoughts?
Wow, yeah. I think I'm gonna base myself on Matthew and Mike's answers about how they work with their families, how they manage each other. I think they can be scary because, well, it depends on who you are, who your family is, where you come from. I know in my family, I might have a little bit of resistance from some individuals to having these conversations, or some people don't think these are real issues. But I guess it's about wanting to have them. It's about finding like those moments when you're all together, or maybe separate as well. Just bringing them up, maybe starting with how you feel as well. Like, tell people, for example, how telling them they can't cry hurts them, and how this is wrong. Like, what are you reading? What are you seeing on the news? How this leads to this? Because sometimes it is true, most of us don't have enough awareness or education on the issues, so we can't expect them to understand why they're wrong. But I guess it's just wanting to have them with your family, not being scared. I find starting them, opening up, giving them also a safe space for others to open up, as well as those questions, and also express how they're feeling. And then eventually you could have more common conversations. It can be something you commonly discuss. But I find it that way. At least that's what happened with my own family. It was just bringing up how we were feeling, why this idea that I was not serving my dad, making him feel bad, was making me feel bad, why this was wrong, why he shouldn't change. So I guess like little by little, my family started opening up, and they started using like certain language or imposing certain things on us. And that's how they started changing. So I think that's how it should be done.
Thank you so much, Monica. Matthew, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really like this question because I think it goes to the root of oftentimes the work that has to be done, right? So when we heard from Tyler earlier about sort of all the problems of, you know, just pointing the finger at everybody else and laying blame everywhere else, but you know, instead of on oneself, I think this is where the work happens a lot of the time. It's in these really uncomfortable conversations that you weren't expecting to happen. It's, you know, dinner around the table and all of a sudden a comment is said, and do you challenge that comment in the moment? Do you have a conversation about it later? And so I do think that we have to sort of think about this from our own sort of spheres of influence. How are we prepared to walk the talk and actually focus on accountability to not letting certain things go ignored? But I also think that we need to always remember and sort of this idea of extending grace to one another, and sort of understanding that, these ways of thinking and being were learned. Nobody was born racist. Nobody was born sexist. These are patterns of behavior that are learned over time. And so sometimes unlearning these patterns of behavior is also gradual. So we need to be relentless in our optimism that people can improve and can form new ways of thinking and being, but we also need to extend people grace and walk that path with them. And so sometimes it can look like calling out and sort of saying, hey, that comment is completely inappropriate. Please don't ever say something like that around me again. Sometimes it can also mean calling in and saying, hey, like I'd love to go for a walk with you and sort of chat about that a little bit more, because I see you as a really caring, gentle person, and what you said sort of doesn't coincide with that view that I have of you, and I just love to explore it more. And so I think it's important that we focus on those relationships throughout, but also I think stay steadfast to the belief that people can improve and can change their ways of thinking and being.
I really like what you said, because I think sometimes people don't even realize that the way they think and the way they speak is hurtful to other people. And so by having the courage to stand up and have those hard conversations with people, I think that is also really helpful and can help them realize how they can change to be more respectful and to other people. Mike, what are your thoughts?
That's a good question. I could definitely see how that could be difficult, especially when it's somebody in your household that you care about and that you love. A lot of people don't like, when it comes to things like jokes and things like that, they don't think they're actually doing harm, right? Especially when they're sitting around a comfy space, like their kitchen table with people that they love, and they think that the joke doesn't hurt anybody's feelings. But like those can definitely be difficult conversations to have. And I agree with like what Monica and Matt said about, like, maybe picking your time. Do you call them out right there, or do you I'd pull them aside afterwards, and if that person like truly cares about you, that they will respect what you have to say, right? And how that comment made them feel. That discomfort means change, right? When you're having those difficult conversations, that means things are happening, right? These aren't supposed to be easy conversations when you're trying to change somebody's viewpoint on something so serious. And there's been many times that I've had those terrible conversations too, right? And it's not all going to change over one conversation. You know what I mean? It's going to take time for things to get better, or for them to at least like view things from a different lens, right? Not just their own original perspective, but maybe seeing things from a different angle. And people don't really like, I feel like people don't, until it personally affects them, then they don't, for the most part, not everybody, obviously, but they don't really care, right? Like until it's something that's actually affecting somebody that they know, or somebody in their own household, or something like that. And that's of course not for everybody. Like, I know so many people care about a lot of stuff, but I think like having those conversations can definitely be difficult, but they need to happen, and that's how change happens with that. You can tell it's happening because that uncomfortableness. That's what I found anyways. But yeah,
I really like that when you're having those difficult conversations and when it feels hard, that's not the time to give up. That's the time that you're actually making progress and you're actually making a difference. So I have another question from the audience for you guys. Somebody asked, what is the hardest lesson that you've learned while working in this field? Mike?
that not everybody wants change. There's a lot of things that are positives in my job and that I've seen, but I don't. That's like, as soon as you said it, that's the first thing that I thought of. There's like you know that expression, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. There's some people who are stuck in their ways and they do not want to see change. They like the way things are going, and you know, they don't. That's the thing that I am that stands out to me. A lot of people do not want to see change.
Yeah, I agree. There's a quote that my mom says that, like, if you have a bucket of water, it doesn't matter how close you bring it to the horse. If the horse doesn't want to drink, there's nothing you can do about it. So we can have all these conversations, but people have to be, it has to come within people to want to change and to be better. Monica?
I think, I'm not sure if it's the hardest one, but it's the first one that came to mind. I think it's definitely when I started like holding myself accountable, when I started seeing how I also contribute a lot to gender norms, how I impose them on other people, how I've also allowed certain things to happen. So I think that was hard for me because I like to think, or I used to think I was a good person, I would never hurt anyone. But it was seeing that and understanding my part in the issue and how I was also failing to do something about it. I was also being very passive about a change. So I think that was hard. It was like realization about my own faults and behaviors, but also understanding that I had to change.
Thank you, Monica. Matthew, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I love the way Monica just said that. Again, it's that personal reflection and that it's that commitment to personal change. I think a tough lesson for me. I think it's a lesson that a lot of male identifying individuals go through when they sort of enter into some of this work is, you know, what is my role in this conversation? Because, you know, women are fantastic and like they've been doing this work for a long time, and we're standing on their shoulders in sort of amplifying some of these conversations, and sort of it's that idea of like ally versus accomplice, right? So similar to what Monica is talking about, it's one thing to be an ally, it's a far better thing to be an accomplice and really ask myself, you know, what am I willing to give up in order to see that change happen? If I'm just, you know, standing on the sidelines and yelling, you know, end men's violence against women and girls, but I'm not really doing anything to make that change happen, or if I'm not prepared to give up my own privilege, like Monica was talking about earlier, to see some of those changes happen, then am I really a part of the solution yet? And so I think that's a really challenging idea to continue to wrestle with, because like, I got to be honest, walking through the world with this white hetero cis body, male body, it's a really comfortable space to exist. And I wonder if that's what Mike is alluding to a little bit too, in terms of like, not everybody wants to see change, because there's a lot of people with identities like mine that realize, or maybe they don't, but realize that, you know, in order for change to happen, you know, some of that power needs to be given back. And that's a really difficult place for people to get to, again, if they're walking through the world with a body like mine.
I totally agree. And I think it's hard to expect other people to change when you're not willing to look within yourself and make that change on your own. I do have one last question for you guys from the audience. Julia has asked, what can be done / said when we encounter people who are tired of all the wokeness? How do we approach that, and how do we talk about that? Monica, can I start with you?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think I'm still working on finding the right answer, because it happens a lot for me. I usually hear the typical joke that men can't find a job because women are taking all the jobs and et cetera, et cetera. And they're like passive jokes, and like, I probably haven't said anything. And I think it's very easy for me to start fighting back and having like a heated argument with people and cutting them off. But I've learned, and I think that's something like Mike was saying, not everyone wants to change. Like Matthew was saying it as well, not everyone cares about these issues. And no matter how hard you try to show them, like it just won't matter. Like they won't care. They're not affected directly, so they won't talk about it. They won't change either. They like the same thing we're saying about the jokes. Like they just don't see how this is harmful. Like they're not doing anything bad. And it's still something for me understanding that some people won't care what I'm saying or what I'm doing with my work. They won't change and they won't listen to me either. And I guess it has showed me a lot to be very respectful of others, have those conversations, even though I don't probably respect their points of view, but also taking a more, I'm not saying passive, but a more respectful approach as well, like being able to understand and meet them in the middle with their answers, but also understanding when, well, it's my time to step out, like there's nothing else I can say to that person, that was it. So I guess I'm still working on that, Julia. I'm still working to understand how I can change other people's minds without them wanting to change.
Thank you, Monica. Matthew, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, like these are the hard-hitting real questions, right? That I think we need to be thinking about. This one's a fantastic question. There's a couple things I think similar to Monica that come to mind really quickly. The first is haters are gonna hate, right? To bring Taylor into the conversation. And sort of this idea of, you know, don't water the rocks. So like, I think this is again what Mike's getting at a little earlier. Like there are those people that aren't going to change their opinion regardless of what we say and we do. And so how much are we going to continue to exert our efforts to those people versus thinking about, I think, larger systematic approaches. So I do think, you know, we've been talking a lot about the personal level for all of these conversations and sort of personal reflection and personal commitment to action. But there's a systems change approach that needs to happen in all of this. And so, you know, we have the power to vote, and we have the power to vote people in, and we have the power to vote people out. We have the power to make sure that racist and misogynistic laws like we're seeing in Quebec are not tolerated where we live. If we for a second think that, you know, the repeal of Roe v. Wade in the United States couldn't happen here, like we're kidding ourselves in a lot of these conversations. And so yes, people are going to be angry, yes, people are going to push back, but that can't deter us from our commitment to action. We just have to find new approaches. And we do need to make sure that things are codified in law and governance and policies within organizations.
Thank you so much. I also really love the Taylor Swift reference there. Mike, did you have any last thoughts that you'd like to end our discussion with?
I first learned the word wokeness. I read an article on, well, I watched the trailer first, and then I read like don't ever read the comment section, guys. It's such a toxic place on anything. But it was the Little Mermaid trailer, the new one, and there was so many angry people about the color of this fictional half fish, half woman being from Disney, and I couldn't believe it. And everybody was talking about wokeness and stuff, and I was just like, what is going on? Why are you guys so mad? It's a Little Mermaid. Anyways, no, I just think that I think we need to a lot of like what Matt said and Monica, a lot of people don't want to change, and if they are ready to change, then they will be ready. They can't you can't waste your energy on those types of people, right? If you're trying to do good and trying to make this world a better place, like you can't, you'll end up burning yourself out. I know there's a lot of people out there who don't want change, and there's a lot that do, and I just think that using our our positive energy and that kindness and walking with those good intentions to light up the darkness per se. I think we need to really dedicate ourselves to making sure that we're doing it in the right venues and the right audience type thing. And yeah, I think you need to pick your battles for sure, because this type of work can get exhausting and it can be tough, and you can find yourself repeating yourself but it's worth it. If you guys are making change and seeing change, it's worth it. Like I said earlier, like we're trying to make this world a better place for you guys and then for the next ones coming through and that type of stuff. And that's what makes it worth it.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank so much to all of our panelists for coming out and to talking to us today and for speaking so candidly about your own life experiences and the work that you are doing. We're so thankful for everything that you do and for coming out today. So we're going to take a quick 5-minute break, and then we're going to have Fraser and Amy. Thanks again, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back from the break. My name is Daniel, and I'm a biology student at Western, and I'm part of the NFF Youth Committee. I would like to start off by thanking Tyler, Matthew, Mike, and Monica for being part of the Youth Conference. Thank you for taking your time of your day today to speak to all of us today. And now Amy Keating and Fraser Brown will deliver our closing keynote, who are part of an amazing organization called ANOVA. ANOVA provides safe places, shelter, support, counseling, and resources for abused women, their children, and all oppressed individuals to find a new start. Amy Keating is a queer and non-binary public educator, a scholar and writer who coordinates youth programs at ANOVA. Amy is passionate about collaborating with young folks to end gender-based violence through art, workshops, and creating safe educational spaces for the 2S LGBTQIA+ youth. Fraser Brown is a certified human resources professional passionate about equity, diversity, and inclusion. He previously was president of Fanshaw's 2S LGBTQIA+ student organization, worked as the sexual violence peer support and student life assistant at Fanshawe College, and facilitated NOVA's Man-Made group, professional development opportunity for young men to learn about healthy masculinity, accountability, and bystander intervention. Welcome audience questions in the Q&A box, and here they are now.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having us today. Fraser and I are so thrilled to be here. As Daniel said, my name is Amy. I work at ANOVA in London. We work towards creating a future without gender-based violence in our London and Middlesex community. I am the youth programming coordinator, which is a part of our public education team. I'll get into that a little bit more as we continue our conversation, but Fraser, would you like to say hello?
Awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm Fraser. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm one of ANOVA's public education facilitators. Thank you so much for inviting us to speak at this conference. We truly appreciate it, and we hope that you've learned something fantastic from all the panelists that we've been chatting with today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So let's talk about public education, and let's talk about how we engage in encouraging and fostering healthy masculinities in our work as public educators, and how we have these conversations surrounding masculinity, femininity, and gender roles in general. So let's begin. I hope that you learn from us today, but I also I'm looking forward to responding to many of the wonderful points that the previous panelists and speakers said that relate to a lot of the work we do as public educators. So public education is a lot of work. It is really rewarding. It can be very tiring. But it is essentially offering education that meets participants where they're at, going out into the community, providing workshops, presentations, weekly groups, social groups on topics that work to unpack and undo gender-based violence, and why I love doing it personally is because we have the capacity to tailor this type of education to the participants that we're speaking with, and the very circumstances that they're engaging in, because education is not one size fits all. And we have to attend to that as we work towards believing that folks have the capacity to change. Change and growth was a huge topic that was brought up by the panelists in that last session there. And part of why we're so passionate about educating folks regarding gender-based violence is the fact that we believe that we all have the capacity to change and grow. If we didn't believe that, we wouldn't be doing this work, I don't think. But I want to say and sort of talk a little bit as we go through, give examples of how we model this education to various groups, and I guess, well, to you folks today. So one thing that we do that really harkens back to a lot of the discussions that we've been having is we use a stoplight as a metaphor for learning and self-reflection, because we're going to be talking about in these spaces big ideas that can be emotional for a lot of people, can be jarring, it can be a totally new worldview different from what we've grown up with. So what we do is incorporate this tool of the spotlight or stoplight, where we use the colors green, yellow, red to think about the comfort we have with the material we're going through. If you're sitting at the green stoplight, I mean, green means go, so you're not sitting there. You're comfortable with the content, which is great, but maybe you're not really learning something new. So a big thing that we encourage is having folks sit at the yellow stoplight, which is a little bit of that discomfort, acknowledging that maybe our worldviews are being challenged a little bit. Maybe we're being forced to see something from a new perspective we had not yet considered. And I have just a note from one of the things that Mike said in that last session, which is that this discomfort, it means change. It means we are encountering a new perspective, and this is where that good growth happens. So just reflecting on that stoplight, and then of course the red zone means, maybe you are starting to feel unsafe, but I just want to harken back to that space where a little bit of discomfort is important in public education, which means that we're having a lot of discussions, which can be difficult. But just to give you, oh, sorry, did you want to add to that, Fraser?
I was just going to jump on and say, just like Mike and Matthew were mentioning, unlearning those things that we have been steeped in society is that challenging piece there, where we're sitting in that uncomfortability, which isn't a bad thing if we're at that yellow space, as long as we haven't gone too far and shut down in the red.
Absolutely. So to speak a little bit more about what we do as public educators in our community, I just have a brief overview of many of the topics that we cover generally through ANOVA. And many of these sort of overlap with one another, but we're going out into our community and we're having discussions on gender-based violence broadly, sexual violence and consent, disclosure training, trauma-informed care and practice, as well as bystander intervention. So as you can imagine, a lot of these conversations are difficult, and a lot of these conversations encourage people to do that inward self-reflection and that personal work and growth. But it really is sort of this underlying conversation of how do we have not just healthy masculinities, but conceptions of gender that are no longer confining or limiting to who we are as human beings in ways that can end up being harmful. So this is an ongoing through line that occurs in all of our conversations as public educators. Just wanted to add there as well. you'll see some of these things come up in terms of how I personally do engage with the youth. But a lot of this means using things like what you might have as male privilege to engage in being a better ally or accomplice, as we were saying, in creating this change. So that shows up pretty prevalently in something like bystander intervention, which we'll talk a little bit about as I continue. So just a little bit of an overview of what we do as public educators. So I work as youth programming coordinator. Youth spans a broad range of ages. I could work with youth as young as 11 years old and up to 29 years old. So in that, I'm dealing with a lot of different life experiences and a lot of different levels of understanding and a lot of different perspectives. But what becomes really apparent in public education is that engaging youth is so deeply important, which is why, I mean, it's such a privilege to be able to speak and be here with you folks at NFF today, because I mean, it's trite a little bit to say that children are our future, but it's not incorrect. And if we don't listen to the voices of the youth, and if we don't take them seriously in their own experiences and own knowledges, then we're ignoring a big part of the population, and a big part of the population that has the capacity to create a lot of important change. I think, and as I kind of will get into when I share some of our programming, there's an expectation or sort of a general idea that gender expression and gender roles in youth have gotten a lot better. And that parts of this is definitely quite true. But these limitations, these narrow boxes that gender confines us to, still very much show up in the lived experiences of the youth that I engage with. And we even saw that Matthew gave the example of his son who had learned already that, you know, boys weren't supposed to cry. So as much as we can see sort of progressive representation in our media, there's still so much work to be done, and engaging with youth is a hugely important facet of that work.
And I'll be chatting a bit more about man-made at the end of this presentation too, as we go through. But I just wanted to highlight that even as the youth grow up and become young adults too, we do an activity called The Man I Admire Most, where they go over their role models, and we still begin to see the same kind of characteristics come out. That stoicism, the breadwinner, when we break down, why are these the men that you admire most? Those are often common themes that come out of those characteristics.
Thanks, Fraser. So specifically, in my position at ANOVA, I've had the enormous privilege of giving workshops and holding groups based on a lot of these topics specifically. So similar to our overall public education programming, but some particular specifics. Notably, a lot of talk about apologies and what that means to sort of perhaps take some sort of accountability and in turn create change, as well as LGBTQIA2S+ education and safe spaces. And I'll get into a little bit more depth about that shortly. But it's clear, you know, I'm a queer non-binary person. Not only is this a topic that is quite close to my heart, but it has become apparent that there are a lot of youth in London who are really striving and looking for these spaces, looking for these connections, looking for these role models, people that they can trust, where they can make these connections and learn more about themselves. So what does it mean to sort of think about gender with youth? How do gender roles show up in youth experiences? We've talked about it a little bit so far throughout our presentations, but just some examples that I have encountered is the fact that there are still quite young youth, even at elementary school age, who are finding, young girls in a classroom, maybe 12 or 13, who are experiencing young boys not respecting their boundaries, body shaming them, making jokes where they're not funny and they're harmful. And then when they, don't laugh at them, they're being told they're too sensitive. So we can already see how these things are playing into those expectations of gender, even at such a young age. So this still very much shows up, on the playground, on social media, in high school, and even occurs, at the university age level. These difficulties remain quite prevalent. I believe in the capacity, obviously, for youth to be a part of the change. And none of these behaviors are innate. This harm that we cause others, sexism, homophobia, they are learned. And the reality is some of these young kids are still seeing a lot of that modeled for them in society. And they don't really take a moment to critique them, because why would they? This is just kind of the way it is. So how do we sort of engage in these conversations when we're being tasked with, let's talk to youth about gender roles, let's talk about how they can be harmful? It's a really difficult conversation to have. And every time I have it, I miss something. It's imperfect. There are things we don't get to talk about, or we spend a lot of time on one area of the conversation. But regardless of kind of the age group that I'm talking to, I ask a similar version of this question, which is, or these questions, I suppose. How are women supposed to look and act, quote unquote, and how are men supposed to look and act? It's very fascinating because I get a lot of different answers depending on the context, depending on who I'm working with. But there are some similar threads that I see sort of regardless of where I go. That is that initially there is some hesitance to even answer these questions. And I think that offers us a lot of information, because they know that these expectations are harmful. So many of them are kind of unwilling to even say them out loud, because they know already that it's not fair to have these very narrow roles placed upon one another. And I find that super fascinating and also quite hopeful. Particularly as they start to kind of name these things out loud, when I kind of prod a little bit longer and say, just by answering this question, it doesn't mean that you believe in that, but what does society tell us? What do we hear growing up? What do we hear from other people? What do we hear from media? And still to this day, we get a lot of those sort of traditional gender roles, ideas of women are supposed to be a bit more passive, a bit more submissive, gentle, the caregiver. Women are also overly emotional. And then on the other hand, we have men who are sort of, as Fraser was saying, the breadwinner, the stoic person who doesn't show his emotions. And if he does show his emotions, it's probably just anger. And he sort of makes the calls, he's a bit more dominant. So to this day, many of us still get these expectations thrown on us, and youth as young as 12 are already beginning to unpack some of these things when I start to ask them this question. I find it very fascinating that there has been some common pushback that I've been getting over the past 6 months even. And that is from young folks who say things like, when we're talking about gender-based violence, and we bring forth maybe statistics that show men are more likely to be the ones to cause harm based on some statistics we have from Stats Canada or whatever. I have a lot of folks saying things like, yeah, sometimes women are a lot worse, or women tend to be a lot worse. And I've been trying to make sense of this comment, and I haven't found a perfect response to it, because sometimes I think it is coming from places of personal experience, because it is absolutely true that folks of any gender can cause harm. But what I kind of suspect is underlying in this comment is a bit of a cry for help for men. And it's not always the case that women are harmful to men, but this cry for help where a lot of young men don't feel like they can say anything because they've been taught not to be emotional, or that it's shameful or embarrassing if they're experiencing harm from a woman, because shouldn't he be stronger than her? This is probably not the whole story, but I think it's a significant part of the story. I think it's a little nugget of information that's saying we need to talk about how gender roles hurt men too, which is essentially what I try to get to, and what Fraser and I try to get to when we have these conversations, in that we talk about gender historically and these expectations as hurting women, because a lot of these things historically have been led by feminist movements, and it's absolutely true that these expectations have been harmful to women. They've also been harmful to young men, and we've been talking about that all day. So I again find it informative that young folks are picking up on this too. So how do we work towards encouraging healthy masculinities with youth? So going through, some of the activities we do in these workshops or presentations or groups really outline a lot of things that have been brought up again in this conference so far. Namely, I think almost everyone has talked about the difference between intent and impact. I know Tyler kind of named it sort of pretty directly, and it was discussed in that last panel. But it's important for us all to recognize, all of us as imperfect human beings, that despite our intentions, even if they're wonderful or even neutral, we still have the capacity to harm somebody else. Sometimes our intention doesn't land like we intended to. There's a disconnect between intention and impact. And knowing that this can be the case is a huge step in acknowledging that we can be a person who maybe unintentionally has caused harm, and acknowledging that there's an importance to centering the experiences that somebody has had when they have been harmed. This gets brought up a lot with youth in the form of jokes, and Mike brought that up in the last panel too. People will say, oh, it's just a joke. It's intended to make somebody laugh. This is used a lot, sort of this "it's just a joke" phrasing, to invalidate a lot of the experiences that this harm, the experiences of the people that a joke can be harmful to. So yes, it is just a joke and it is harmful. We also talk about things like bystander intervention. So how can we engage in a situation that we see where something's going awry or harm is being done or maybe about to be done, and support our peers. And this is helpful when we talk about this, like particularly with young folks and young boys and young men who are interested in being better allies. We go through some tools that we can use to be better community members to one another. We talk about the importance of meaningful apologies, because again, if we believe that we all have, folks have the capacity to do better, part of this is taking accountability and acknowledging the harm that is caused. And one thing that I have been working on quite a bit is, and as I had mentioned, is LGBTQIA2S+ acceptance and allyship. When we think about the gender roles, those boxes of what a woman is supposed to be and what a man is supposed to be, being heterosexual and being cisgender are directly tied to that. So when LGBTQ+ youth diverge from these expectations, many of them are at risk of being ostracized or harmed or bullied because of their divergence from these gender expectations. So that's why I think acknowledging this as tied to gender roles is very important to changing sort of the conversation of masculinity to being what we've been talking about, like as quote unquote toxic masculinity, to what does a healthy masculinity look like? If heterosexuality and cis normativity are directly tied to those gender roles. So when I say cis normativity, I mean the expectation that everyone is cisgender, meaning they are identifying with the gender they were assigned at birth. Cisnormativity is prevalent in the lack of trans resources or trans healthcare, or the existence of transphobia, just to give a bit of a definition there. But as these things are tied to gender roles, sometimes traditional masculinity's expectation of dominance confines people to these gender roles, because when somebody is challenging these gender roles, maybe it can feel kind of challenging to you or to how you define your own gender. So there's a lot of increasing narratives in online spheres that of course we see within real daily activities and interactions, and not the online world is not distinct from the real world. This was a question brought up on the last panel, this idea of too much wokeness, PC culture has gone too far. There's a lot of equation of that with men being sort of victims of PC culture. So that is a really difficult knot to untangle, but these narratives directly affect LGBTQ youth who are just looking for respect and human decency and to be seen as human beings. And by virtue of refusing to accept someone's pronouns because it is infringing on your freedom of speech, that is an active form of violence. So the way that these forms of masculinity continue to pervade in our culture is still very much there. So it is my hope that a lot of this work is doing just a little bits and pieces of trying to undo that, trying to provide spaces for healthier masculinities. Okay, and that was a lot from me. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Fraser.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy, for going over such in depth how ANOVA interacts out in the public and serves the community with so many of our education programs. So I'm here specifically to talk about ANOVA's program Man-Made that's done with post-secondary students who identify as men. We have a lot of them who volunteered to attend the program as peer leaders, as member of varsity teams, as student club and student council leaders, and also with some who have been voluntold to attend these programs because they've caused some infraction against some student code of conduct. So our goal is to have facilitated conversations with these folks on healthy masculinity, sexuality, and becoming upstanders throughout these. Part of it, and part of that piece that we cover, is sexual violence as a spectrum, going over anything that is gender-based violence without consent perpetrates harm, and honoring those. So jokes, for example, as Amy was talking about earlier, what they said holds true with, even if it's not somebody's intent to cause harm, the impact is violence in those situations because somebody's space has now felt unsafe out in public. And they've also marked us as potentially somebody that they could not approach or come to with some struggles they might be experiencing throughout. So that's one piece that we cover. Going back to the questions Amy asked, how are women supposed to look and act? How are men supposed to look and act? In Man-Made, we do an activity called the Man Box. So with that, we ask folks to identify men that they admire the most. And we begin to see common characteristics come out. A lot of them choose perhaps father figures or businessmen or politicians, athletes. And a lot of it boils down to the stoicism that they express, the ability that they have to earn an income, their physical appearance that they go through. And we start to see how Western society has really, in a way, rewarded those kind of characteristics and that patriarchal structure, and how these young folks have internalized that. One example that sticks out to me is one participant said the man they look up to most is Elon Musk, a man who has in the past made sexist jokes on Twitter, tweeting misogynistic comments to Elizabeth Warren, other political figures, and also stated that he wants to start a university called the Texas Institute of Technology and Science and not rearrange the letters, because at that point it would not spell out tits if it was to be rearranged as Texas Institute of Science and Technology. So seeing how those kind of individuals get rewarded by society is something that young folks need to unlearn. And that's part of the conversation that we have too. So as they begin developing how men are supposed to act and how women are supposed to act according to societal expectations, we go through that and ask, okay, what happens if folks begin to deviate from those expectations? And sometimes this is the first time they've been able to explore how they personally deviate from those expectations and have that vulnerable conversation, which is something that's really beautiful to see and come out of these pieces. All right, because it is a lot of unlearning what society has typically rewarded in the past. Also, out of our talk on healthy sexuality, sometimes pornography comes into that, or the media, where how sex has been portrayed in society and Western culture. And that's a lot of pressure that has been put on men to look a certain particular way, to act a certain particular way, to know and to go through those pieces and to perform in those particular ways. And that can be harmful, and a lot of pressure that men receive and put on themselves too. So having those conversations with them and unpacking how the patriarchy and these elements have actually caused harm to men too. Part of what Amy was talking about earlier with that frequent question of, well, women have been causing harm now too, as well. In these conversations, we try and get a bit of buy-in in the beginning by saying, these groups of people, people who have activities outside the home at night, people who are under the age of 25, people who belong to different ethnic origins, people who belong to the LGBTQ plus community or 2S LGBTQ AI plus community are at elevated levels of experiencing gender-based violence. So that contains a lot of these participants, first of all. However, after you begin to look at it from an intersectional approach, and the more groups that you begin to belong to, the increased risk of experiencing gender-based violence becomes more apparent and grows exponentially. So that's one piece on trying to get that buy-in from them too. Okay. And then going on from that too, reaffirming that it's okay not to fit into these boxes, and coming through these pieces that it is all right. Now, I wanted to share too, another way that we discuss intent versus impact is normalizing that for a lot of folks, such as myself, who identify as a white man, it would be very, very difficult for them to walk through society and not cause harm at some point unknowingly, because society has been set up for that. And keeping in mind with that, it normalizes that there's a difference between, yes, we have caused gender-based violence, but we are not our actions, and we can learn from them and grow from them. There is a difference between feeling guilt over these actions and using it as a motivating factor, realizing that that was a bad action and learning to grow from that, versus shame, which is then, I did bad, therefore I am bad, therefore I cannot grow. So that's why in the final week that we discuss accountability, the facilitator, who identifies as a man, opens up first and shares a time that they caused gender-based violence, the exact, perhaps, circumstances of what happened, what we were thinking about in the moment, how we reflected on that situation after, and where we go from there too. So within that conversation, we also want to be capturing that reflection piece, because we know the stages of accountability include self-reflection, an apology, repair work as the individual who's been harmed sees the repair necessary, and then changed behavior going forward. So what we're really trying to do with these students is engage with that self-reflection piece. And that opens up that conversation where, again, separating that you can move forward and you can make change too afterwards. All right. And with that, some of the successes and common pushbacks that we've had, we have really touched on a lot of the common pushbacks, such as a joke, it's just a joke, but acknowledging that language is harmful. It's not up to us to be judge and jury of what's harmful to someone else. Even if that was not our intention to be harmful, we don't get to decide other people's experiences for them, okay? And honoring that. Another common pushback that we get throughout Porn Week too even is different pieces are just preference. I just have a preference for, we had one participant say, oh, I just have a preference for Black girls. And however, we had to walk them back and go through how on these websites, for example, it's literally looked at as a menu. You've stripped away every other element of that person except for one characteristic. So looking at how there's a difference between admiring that element and, but then to the point of fetishizing it. All right, so that's another common pushback that we have, and how we try and open up that. Now, what this doing is eliminating everyone just down to one bare characteristic and nothing else about them, instead of treating them as a whole person there. A real success from the program, though, I would say one participant sticks out. He thought he was signing up for essentially an incel type men's group where we were going to be discussing how things were great back in the day with conservative values and when it was gender enforced roles, because that's how he had been raised in his family. And coming to college, it had completely thrown him, seeing so many different things. We thought he would be gone by the second week since he was a volunteer coming to these groups, but he came back each week and slowly started to begin understanding more that even if it's not something that he necessarily at first understood, he says he had never met another somebody who was gay before. So I outed myself in that session as, no, you have, I'm a gay man, which was it showed a lot of realization on his face. He was taken aback and surprised, but just had questions more and was curious because it was almost like meeting an alien for him, is what it felt like at points. Just engaging that curiosity and that conversation and that piece was really helpful to see. And even throughout it, he began to realize that, oh, even if other people don't prescribe to what I had been raised and what I had thought, the way that they live their life and the way they identify, that doesn't have an impact on me. So he turned out to be a great, I'd say, ally by the end of it. So we're moving him along the path towards accomplice, which is, I think, what our end goal is here throughout these educational sessions. So that had been fantastic to see. All right, and anything else you want to add there, Amy?
No, maybe we just wrap up, and if there's like a little bit of time for questions. Just from all of this, as public educators working towards a future without violence, engaging youth is a necessary step on this journey, and as well as unpacking expectations of masculinities should take place with all sorts of populations and participants that we engage with. And it is important too to recognize that there are pressures that men face from these gender roles that can help facilitate open discussion, which is important for change, for that self-reflection that Fraser gave us all of those examples of. And I do believe a future with healthy masculinities, or seeing more of them, is possible. So thank you so much for having us speak today. Here is some information on us. If you would like to reach out, you are free to take down our emails if you have a question further on, or if you want to get connected to our pub ed team, you can reach us at education@anovafuture.org.
Thank you so much, Amy and Fraser, for coming in today. I think we only have time for one question. So I'm going to ask the most generic question I can find here, and which would be, what is a good way to let a male friend know that they're exhibiting unhealthy masculinity?
So with that, one of the quick examples that I use, sometimes I'll pause, almost look at one of my friends, and they'll realize something like, oh, maybe what I said there wasn't acceptable, because with memes out there, with shows like Family Guy, American Dad, I know I'm dating myself a little bit there, but these have become commonplace jokes that a lot of folks haven't even stopped to pause and really think about, what am I actually saying? How can this be offensive to somebody? I think back when I was in high school, for example, that's so gay was a common thing to say when you were referring to, oh, that's something that's stupid. And a lot of folks didn't even realize, oh, what am I saying? What kind of neural pathways and connections is this doing when I associate gay and stupid, right? So sometimes I'll just pause and I'll ask them to repeat themselves. And at that point, I'll ask like, oh, I don't really get the humor there. Could you explain it to me? And kind of play a little naive for a moment there. And that in and of itself is really one quick way for them as they start walking through what they've actually said, they begin to question that a little bit. And I think in that moment, they're unlearning something. So that's a positive element that I see. Amy, did you want to jump in as well with any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I love that tactic. I think that is often a go-to of mine as well. And I also think too is having patience, maybe showing a little bit of sympathy or empathy, kind of like, meeting people where they're at, knowing that, our friends who maybe exhibit some of these behaviors, they're not going to change overnight. They might find that they're in that yellow zone, their views are being challenged. That can feel jarring, that can feel that feels challenging. It's hard, it's emotional in a lot of ways. So having that patience and care, coming from a little bit of sympathy, even recognizing if a lot of these folks are maybe living in a lot of privilege, I think is a good way to kind of show people that, you believe in them and they have the capacity to do better, and you're not really just jumping on them right away or something like that. That's how I would also add to that.
Building on that patience, I'll just mention, so I like to think of us, it's like the tea analogy I've heard before. We've been steeped in these messages from TV shows, from family, from religion, all this time growing up. So it takes a long time to unlearn some of that, right? Because the longer that tea steeps, the stronger it gets. So the darker it becomes. So that means, sometimes there might be a stain there. You got to get that tide to go and use some more patience to bring it out, right? So it's going through those motions and understanding it's not going to be overnight.
I actually like that a lot. Like thinking of how much time we spend on learning these behaviors. It's going to take us some time to unlearn them as well. Thank you again so much for coming in today. That's all the time we have for questions. If anyone experienced any discomfort or needs someone to talk to, reach out to the numbers on the bottom of the screen. There are other resources in the chat box as well. Thank you for everyone for coming today to this year's NFF Youth Conference. Thank you to all youth members and staff that made this conference possible. Thank you to our speakers today, Tyler Simmonds, Monica McQueen, Mike Simwick, Matthew Soretta, Amy Keating, and Fraser Brown, along with all the youth committee members, Murado and Ella. Hope everyone was able to grasp something unique to them from this conference. We'd love to hear from you about this event. Your feedback is very important to us as we continue on this path of having important conversations. Please use the link in the chat box to provide feedback. I wish everyone all the best. And if anyone would like to look further into today's topics, here are some resources at the bottom of the chat. Thank you so much.